Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one of a series of videos that I'm doing on magic systems and magic mechanics for video games. It's part of a larger suite of videos that I'm doing about video game design and related issues. So in this one, I'm going to approach the concept of spells. We're now starting to get into the mechanics stuff in games. And in this one, I'm going to briefly talk about some aspects of spells. It's kind of pretty straightforward and self-evident, really. And then I'm just going to plow into a list of example spells. So here we go. So spells, they're an action. They're something that you do as a player. They're intentional, so you have to choose to cast a spell. They're usually not something that happens automatically. They're usually at a fixed point in time. They may take some time to actually cast, but there's usually a point in time in the game that that you choose to cast the spell, and they're the cause for the effect. So the spell is the cause, and the effect is the outcome, which is the actual magic that you're after. So most magic systems and games are based on this concept of some form of action, some form of spell. It's not the only way to approach magic, but I would say that 98% of magic systems and games are based on the concept of a spell, and they might not call it that. They might call it something else, but that's fine. So to reiterate, the very basic idea is the player chooses to do something, and that thing that they do has a magical effect, either on themselves or somewhere else. Okay. It may appear to the player like any other action, so there may be other actions in your game that are available. There might be combat-specific things like a knockback or a shield slam or something. And many games go down the route of whatever the system is that they use for invoking any kind of action, then that includes spells in with that. And in fact, some games you won't really see the distinction between what's magic and what's not magic in there, other than maybe magic uses mana and the others don't. They might use another resource or not use a resource at all. Okay, so often you find that there's some kind of hotkeys that you use or some kind of action bar or something, and these things are linked to it. Okay, so that was that, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about some spell examples. What I'm not trying to do is give you every single possible spell that could appear in a game. That would be ridiculous, because that would be an endless list. What I'm going to try and do really is to give you the most common categories of spell that you tend to find in games. And I'm going to break that down into several things. And within each category, you may have several spells in your game. You may have none. You might not use all these categories. And you may have categories that don't appear here. And you may look at games and think, oh, when Dan did his rundown of all the possible kinds of spell in games, he missed this out. Yes, I will miss some things out. I cannot, again, cover every single base. What I'm claiming isn't that this is every type that you can have, but these are the most common types that you'll find in games. So I'm going to stick by that, and I'm going to plow in. We're going to do this quite quickly so as to not use up too much time. That's the definition of quickly. Right, so offensive spells. These are generally used in combat. You might have melee combat, so an example might be a frost touch. Ranged combat, the classic fireball spell. AoE stands for area of effect, so these are typically spells that will do damage over an area. And they may be a fixed damage amount inside that area, and as soon as you step a tiny bit out, you got no damage at all. Or it may be some kind of diminished return, so the further away you are from the centre, the less damage it does, which is what real-world explosions do. And if you want to know, then the ratio of how it diminishes as you go out from the centre is usually inversely proportional to the square of the distance from where you are. It's called an inverse square law. You might have damage over time, so something that you can cast some kind of curse on an enemy. I've got here Curse of Headache, and it's usually a certain amount of damage over a certain amount of time and a fixed amount of time. Debuffs, so damage over time is kind of like a debuff, but any other effect that you can cast on somebody that you want to have a detrimental effect on. So here, my example is weakness, which is -2 strength for 10 seconds. Buffs is the opposite. Sometimes called enhancements, but not quite the same. So strong arm, +2 strength for 20 seconds. You would probably want to cast this on a party member or on yourself rather than on your enemies, because unless there's some detrimental effect to them having more strength. So, defensive spells. So, I kind of guess the opposite of offensive spells. And these are sometimes the equivalent of armor rather than of weapons, but not always, because we particularly get into healing. So, we can have instant healing, something like you might have something called Envigorate. Healing over time. So, this one, my example, is called Fast Recovery. Excuse me. And then defensive spells like a bubble shield, something that might reduce damage or might, in fact, make you immune to all damage for a short period of time. And finally, in this set, Resurrection. And I can't think of another name for a resurrection spell other than Resurrection. So we're going to move on to the next category of spells, which is Enhancement Spells. So these tend to be more likely to be outside of combat, although some of them are kind of the equivalent of buffs or debuffs, I guess. I guess buffs and debuffs could be thought of as enhancements. So temporary or permanent enchantment of equipment, and there seems to be quite a standard thing that weapons might have enchantments on them that will give you a boost to basic player stats, potentially. But also they could be enchanted to do more damage, or to be faster to wield, or all sorts of different things, or to change the type of damage from piercing to fire, or all sorts of things. And similarly, it can be on other equipment. So you could have an enchanted bottle of water which never runs out of water. Fine. Or you could have maybe more useful enchanted armor. So that either increases something else, some part of the game elsewhere, or just increases the defense of that equipment. You can have temporary enchantments of characters, so that's positive or negative, and that, I guess, is pretty much the same as calling them buffs or debuffs, so it kind of fits in this category as well. You can have movement enhancements, speed up, teleport. Phasing is a thing that an idea that some games have, the idea of phasing in and out of reality. So if you phase out, then you can't be hit by things, but you can't hit anything else. It's kind of like crossing over into another dimension and then potentially crossing back again. And then finally, some other categories. So rather than picking through each one of these in quite so much detail, I'm just going to throw these up. So Conjuration is the creating of items or minions. I guess creation of anything. Abjuration is the opposite, which is destruction. So it's destroying items or creatures. Evocation, calling forth spirits, demons, powers, some kind of spiritual entity. Reanimation, zombies. Zombies are incredibly popular in games. Skeletons, undead of all sorts of kinds being brought back to life deliberately by using reanimation spells. So some people would categorize this as necromancy, and that is one of the several uses of the word necromancy It can mean several other branches of magic or things to do with magic. So it can be using the power of items taken from dead people or creatures. So it's always to do with death, is necromancy. It can be magic that causes death. It can be magic wherein you have to kill something to make the magic work. And it's quite a dark area. Moving on, mind effects, things like illusions, glamours, clone, meaning in the sense of this is a kind of a classic spell might be to create illusory 5 more illusory copies of yourself, and your enemies don't know which one's the real one. But note that it's always, for a mind effect, it's illusory rather than real. If it was real, it would be some kind of invocation spell. Fear, which is to instill a feeling of fear into your enemies or your friends, if that's how you want to play things. Cosmetic effects might be things like glows, etc. Okay, so as I say, there may be other categories. There may be categories that I missed. I have gone through this quite quickly, but hopefully it kind of gives you an overview of the sorts of things that are possible in a magic system in a game. In the next video, I'm going to start pulling apart the actual game mechanics of casting spells and what might be involved, and just really pulling apart the detail and stating a whole lot of obvious stuff, but showing you where there might be different options as a game designer in terms of designing how your spells work in games. But that's it from me for now.